you on, and hopefully my intro did it justice. This is kind of one of those situations that was really kind of an emergency podcast, just because of the nature of how everything's sort of playing out with the land swap and stuff like that. So if you would go ahead and give a little bit of an introduction to yourself, your background, stuff like that, maybe what the Blue Ribbon Coalition is.
Yeah, so I'm Ben Burr. I'm the executive director of the Blue Ribbon Coalition. I live down in southern Utah. Spent my whole life kind of living out here in the West. My family was in the helicopter business, so we got all over the place. Getting into the backcountry, doing logging jobs, firefighting jobs, all the things that use helicopters to do out here in the West. And so for that reason, I just kind of got heavily involved in land policy. I spent some time working in DC and Congress and left, found a Forest Service supervisor who was out helping ranchers kind of resolve conflicts with agencies. And this was during the time that the Bundys had kind of had their flare-ups, and it just seemed odd to me that those conflicts had escalated to that level. And I said, why isn't there more people helping these public land users navigate this system? And he says it's just hard and it's complicated. There's like most of them are, and so I kind of had him teach me how to work within public land agencies, learn the administrative processes, and try and change policy outcomes by working through the agencies. And I was doing that was when I got discovered by Blue Ribbon Coalition. They hired me to do their policy work at first, and then since moved up to being the executive director. BRC is primarily focused on maintaining recreation access to public lands. There's been a heavy emphasis on motorized access because that's where a lot of the restrictions come into play and a lot of the legal definitions of how lands get managed. And so we tend to get a lot of support out of the motorized recreation community, but we really do advocate for and fight for all forms of public land users that want to use public lands for recreation. And I think we're an authentic and unique voice in that space. We definitely are looking at our issues differently than a lot of people in some cases. And I think that is good. I think that adds a lot of the more viewpoints coming into these policies, the better. I found with most land policies, it's easy to kind of break them into partisan buckets if you want to, but once you really get into the weeds on one, it's just every policy proposal is different and you have to get into the weeds on it. And that's what we try to do. And it's what we've done here with this Miller Mountain Land Exchange.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the partisanship, but it seems like if you scrolled through some of the videos that I had with the Public Land Advocate, I got so many comments. Oh, Republicans this and blah 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 blah. And one of the things that, just like you said, if you start digging through a lot of this stuff, it's not just a black and white issue. Granted, the Democratic side has, in my opinion, done a lot more for wildlife conservation and public lands than probably the Republican side, but that doesn't mean that there's not devils on both sides,
Yeah, so we're a 501c3, so I don't really weigh too deep into politics. I mean, we will talk about politicians from time to time because they have an influence on these things, but I'd say it's a mixed bag, I mean, and this land system's really gone through different iterations of itself all the way from the founding of the country until now. It's gone through at least 5 major big policy cycles, and we're kind of getting to the end of one of those policy cycles. And that's probably the cycle you're describing, which is sort of this operating system that got put in place in the 60s and 70s. Most of those laws were passed by Richard Nixon, actually, and pushed for by Republicans, but then they've been operationalized by a lot of the Democrat and left-leaning groups since then, especially during the 80s and 90s. They really came into their own with the legal advocacy around these things. And I think that's all in a process of flux right now. I think the 2020s is a decade of a lot of political upheaval. I mean, you look out your window and it's happening everywhere you look at this point. And so I think a lot of the politics around these issues are going to realign. And what you thought was a Democrat 10 years ago versus a Republican might be different in 5, 10 years from now. And so, but those changes don't happen. A lot of that has to do with generational changes. And as a younger generation kind of takes the reins of the policy system. And so we are interested in those discussions, and that's why we get in the weeds on these and just try to see what's the best policy here around. We have a very defined set of interests, and it leads to some interesting outcomes and interesting discussions. But
Well, before we get into the Miller Mountain thing, so you had touched on some of the policy cycles and stuff like that. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like, what is the
Mhm.
background of all of this? Because it seems like we're seeing so many, um, potential land sales and just all
yeah,
kinds of different things. So how does all that work, and what's the background in that?
let me give me like 10 seconds to go grab a book off my nightstand, even though I know we're live, but just trust me, I'll be right
Yeah,
back.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
one
yeah.
sec. All right, I'm back since
Yeah.
you asked. So this book, After Nature by Jedediah Purdy. It's like an academic book, more it's like not light reading. But this is A Politics for the Anthropocene. And he's the one where I kind of got the idea of this. Like he defines there were really 5 big cycles of our public land system or our land policy in America. And it started off with the founding generation was this kind of aristocratic implant of what you had in Europe that all the colonists were kind of fleeing, but that's George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all of those original founders of our country really were kind of this transplanted version of the European system where you had landed gentry that would come, and especially in the South, this was very prevalent. And that was really the system we had from the 1770s until about the 1820s when Andrew Jackson became the president. And you got into this Jacksonian era, which was sort of perceived to be more democratic and populist. And that's when we got the Homestead Acts, where we were just going to give away free land to people. And so that's why there isn't public land out in the East, because we were homesteading all of that land out to people who were then populating the country. And of course, through all of this, you have the other big narratives of like slavery and what was happening to the Native Americans and all of this. But this is sort of the United States of America's political system's expression of its land policy through the course of these time periods. And so by the time you get to like the mid to late 1850s, 60s, 70s, you get the beginning of like what's the Transcendental Movement. That's like Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Walt Whitman, and this was sort of this idea that nature has inherent value, has spiritual value, and this is when you had a lot of the natural sciences were getting developed, like Darwin and a lot, and that kind of changed how people thought about nature, and really was like the seeds of the modern day environmental movement. And the American landscape was seen as uniquely valuable in this sense. There were like art movements that coincided with this. And that kind of then culminated with Teddy Roosevelt. And he was kind of the first progressive president we had as an American president, who was also a Republican. And it kind of laid the foundation for the administrative management of big swaths of federally owned public land. And he was the one who started the Forest Service and signed the Antiquities Act, laid the foundation for like the national parks, and some of these things really kind of came out of that era of Teddy Roosevelt. And so that's when we kind of entered what we'd call the administrative era. And that really grew and flourished through the Roosevelt, the FDR, like the New Deal and all of that. It got a lot of continued attention and traction. And then by the 1960s, it culminated in the wilderness kind of preservation, anti-pollution movement, like a lot of those laws that came into effect then. And that's what has been our operating system for probably through our lifetimes, And so this book kind of cycles this out that these kind of are 50 to 70 year cycles. They're built around big cohorts of generations. And so the 1960s policy paradigm is really something that's built around the baby boomer political identity. And so something is going to come after it. And if you look at what the biggest users are of public land now, I mean, it's not people homesteading, it's not people writing poetry, it's people going out for recreation is by far the biggest user group of people using public lands. It's become a economic juggernaut in and of its own. It's over $1 trillion of economic value comes out of outdoor recreation of all kinds. And so it can compete on its own terms against anything, oil, gas, anything. And then you also have this alternative energy push, right? I mean, we do have to find ways to power a planet in towards a future of abundance that isn't just completely dependent on oil and gas. And we're starting, I think we'll see a whole almost century of that kind of policy challenge and debate and fight. And should we use land for these things or not? And so those to me are the big centers of gravity that will emerge in probably the next 5 to 10 years will be outdoor recreation and alternative energy. And it doesn't mean these other previous iterations won't be part of this. If you fly over the country now, you still see abundant evidence that the Homestead Act happened. It still governs how all land use decisions, even this Miller Mountain Land Exchange we'll talk about today, is rooted in the Homestead Act. And so it's like it's not like the wilderness movement dies and goes away. It just isn't the center of gravity anymore. And
Gotcha.
that's what I think will change in the coming years. And so outdoor recreation users need to start defining public land policy around their interests. We haven't really ever done that yet. It's always been an afterthought of public land management to consider what the outdoor recreation implications are of things. I think if this community and the industry kind of wakes up and asserts itself, it has a lot of influence to wield, and it just hasn't quite done it yet.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the number of like just hunters, and that's a number I'm more familiar with, you know, having immersed myself in the outdoor industry that way.
Mm-hmm.
The just overall recreational side outside of hunting is probably 10 times or more what hunting is. And
You're actually the third largest group.
really,
Yeah. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis does break this down, and they'll say that you have all of outdoor recreation combined is like $1 trillion now, and then they break it down to like the top 5 biggest sectors of the outdoor recreation industry. And so number 1 is boating and fishing.
Hmm.
And it's just because buying a boat is expensive. And so the economic impact of people buying boats is almost like the equivalent of the housing market. I mean, buying a new motorboat nowadays is like 6
yeah, a
figures,
mortgage. Yeah, yeah.
And so that's a big industry. And fishing also is popular, and it's nationwide. It doesn't get concentrated around a few states that have public land. I mean, it's everywhere. And it's also coastal, right? And so it's a big industry. Fair, it makes sense. The number 2 is RVs and motorhomes. Again,
Wow.
it's because to participate, you have to buy a house, essentially. It's a big industry to get involved in. And I think that will continue as long as, I mean, you have this retiring baby boomer demographic is massive. They have a lot of economic power, and they're the ones buying most of these motorhomes at this point. And that's going to continue to be just a juggernaut of an industry. Number 3 is hunting. And so that's everything you're involved in. All of that goes into that. And then number 4 is basically OHV, which is like people buying side by sides and dirt bikes and things like that for sport. I mean, they would count hunters also buy motorized vehicles. That's how we look at this. Is like all 5 of these big top 5 are all major motorized component industries, and none of them really have a strong contingent of motorized advocacy going on for them. But so number 4 is like exclusive, like OHV motorized recreation. And again, because buying a side by side or a dirt bike, that's like a big purchase to get into it. And then number 5 is snow sports. And so that's skiing, snowboarding, and snowmobiling. And so I think skiing and snowboarding are obviously like the biggest component of that. But snowmobiling isn't inconsequential either. That's a
Sure.
pretty economically impactful industry as well. And so So yeah, hunting. You guys are the hunting group, and I say
Yeah.
you guys because I myself am not a hunter, but I do work with a lot of our members are hunters. I am sympathetic to the hunting interest and community. We definitely want to try to play nice with all recreation users, and so that means we have to learn and understand the interest. And so,
Right. Well, when I say that they're probably 10 times bigger, I'm talking about population wise.
yeah,
So there's somewhere around, I think it's like 15 million or something like that, hunters, give or take. I think it's between 12 and 16 million, something like that,
yeah,
is what they estimate. But the number of like hikers and paddleboarders and like just all kinds of people like that outside of hunting is it dwarfs hunting. And that's more what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the actual
yeah. That would
economic side of it.
I could see that.
So if to your point, if everybody or even half of the people that actually recreate went out and actually lent their voice and said, "Hey, no, you guys need to stop this crap," then that's a lot of people to,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
they're just not fully mobilized yet. They're starting to. I mean, definitely these public land issues get very heated. Land policy does ignite a lot of passions around people. You do fall in love with places, and that's a good thing. But then that needs to get mobilized into effective advocacy. And to your point, there are a lot of that voice does need to consolidate. And if the question then is what should it ask for? The thing I'm focused on, and if we're going to see any big legislative changes in the next 5 or 10 years that will really lead to this switch in the center of gravity of public land that I've talked about, it's that we would create a right of access to public land, not a permitted access, but a right that's legally protectable. Because right now, that kind of is what catches up to us at this
yeah,
point in time. Like a cattle grazing permittee has a property right based right to go and graze cows on their allotment. The recreation user doesn't, and that's codified into the Taylor Grazing Act. We don't have anything that gives us that codified right of access to be there in a legal standing for when that right gets taken away from us.
hmm.
And so if the recreation community could unite around just that one thing, um, I think I think we could find that there's a lot of common ground there, regardless of what the sort of external politics are around a situation. But having that right of access would be incredibly important.
So the Miller Mountain Land Exchange, that's around BLM, right?
Yeah.
So what is the history with BLM? Because people don't really understand why do we have so many different breakdowns of public land?
Mhm.
And BLM is one of those big ones that is federal. So
Yeah. I mean, this is going to be really broad brush, and so
sure.
don't come after me if I misspeak here. But when Teddy Roosevelt, I mean, really the way of disposing of land prior to the Teddy Roosevelt era, uh, the general policy of the government is we want to dispose of the government land. When we expanded westward, it is true the government would kind of recognize that it owned the territories in the West, and then each territory kind of has its own history of how it became a state. But the idea was is that the federal government was always going to dispose of its lands, uh, mostly to private citizens was how it was working. But then by the time Teddy Roosevelt came on the scene, what you were seeing was a lot of that was the Gilded Age era of trust busting and big monopolies kind of consolidating power and holdings of all kinds of industries. And that's what they were seeing happening in the West was that you had this consolidation of land ownership kind of happening around a few big timber operations or grazing operations. And so they saw it as imperative to kind of create a counterbalance against that power to then have a lot of that land held indefinitely by the federal government. And so that's where you had the forest reserves made through the national forest system. And that was kind of the political context of that. And that's when you first saw the federal government say, hey, we're actually going to kind of hang on to this. And so the forest reserves were actually like kind of appropriated and said, hey, these are going to be set aside. But then everything that wasn't in the national forest was still kind of left to the devices of the Homestead Acts and the other things, the Mining Claim Acts and all of those, where they could still be disposed of. And over time, that's kind of where we still are, is that there was like the Office of Land or something, and that I forget the official title of it. I'd have to look it up, but they eventually renamed that the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and that really was just sort of like all the land that was left over that wasn't appropriated through any of the other acts. And so that's why BLM land, you kind of get this very broad variety of what is there in the BLM. Sometimes you get really interesting contiguous pieces of land, like in Utah, that are just these spectacular outdoor recreation areas, really cool landscapes, amazing scenery. But then you also get like these checkerboard parcels that are spread around along the railroad lines, where they never got appropriated because no one was ever going to settle the deserts of Wyoming where there was no water. And so now you have these checkerboard ownerships. You have a lot of orphan parcels, and you have different acts that have then also authorized the appropriation of BLM land. And so in Nevada, you have a very specific act that today it was passed by Harry Reid. This is like current within the last 10 years. They've passed this act, which allows them to sell BLM lands around in the Las Vegas Valley so that it can be built out into subdivisions and housing. And so it's an evolving thing. But I don't know if that answers your question, but it's sort of a broad stroke of why we have the different agencies. And there's a lot more to it. You have Fish and Wildlife Service lands, Bureau of Reclamation lands, the Native American reservation lands have all kind of got caught up in this system, and they all have their own stories too. But that's
right.
Kind of your broad brush on the BLM, which is what we're talking about with Miller Mountain.
Well, I just wanted to give a little bit of context to, before we actually get into Miller, because I want people to understand a little bit of background when it comes to this Miller Mountain Land Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we get into the Miller Mountain Land Exchange? I mean, land exchanges in themselves might not necessarily be a bad thing, but why is it that this particular exchange might not be the best thing?
Yeah, so let me speak to a few kind of contextual things around this one. So the first one is you kind of have this, to your point, land exchanges can be good, they can be bad. They do happen all the time. This isn't like this new, all of a sudden now we've just decided to start exchanging out federal parcels of land for other parcels. This is a very common feature of the public land system. It's been more common than uncommon throughout the history of our public land system. But right now there is heightened scrutiny around these things, just because you kind of have this narrative floating around there that the Trump administration does just want to sell off all the public lands. And there's been some things they've said that kind of lead people to believe that. I think a lot of those kind of are their own debate. Like if they say they want to open land up for oil and gas, that's usually a subsurface mineral lease that's getting sold out. Like that doesn't mean that there's going to be a lot of surface level impact other than the drilling and and so it's kind of what they're proposing to do with the timber and vegetation increased production there is its own story that we could probably do a whole episode on. But it is like the public's very much triggered on this issue. And so in that context, like we were very careful about the Miller Mountain Land Exchange to say, like, is this good or bad? Because we went and looked at some of the parcels that were in that congressional budget bill down in southern Utah. And it's pretty reasonable. I would argue they were pretty routine land exchanges. The ones in Utah, the ones in Nevada we still haven't gotten, like, I have some folks out there local on the ground that want to go and take us on the ground out there. And as soon as I can get out there, I'll go look at them and we can have a better opinion on what was going on in that Nevada portion of it. But I live in Washington County, Utah. So I know, I've been following the policies on a lot of these projects for years. And I think the way that Representative Malloy introduced that in this environment was counterintuitive. Like, I think if she could go back and do it again, she would, because I think in another setting, most of the public would have gone along with some of these exchanges because they were pretty reasonable and routine. So when we went to Miller Mountain, I'm like you, I'm like, this could be good, this could be bad. I don't know. The first videos we made when we were out there, we were kind of saying this could be a good exchange. This one could be a net benefit to public gain and access, because we really can't get in there. It is blocked out to get to this parcel we're in. And then we went and saw the parcel later in the day, just because of how the logistics of getting into these areas worked, of what we were giving up. And it was like, nope, this is bad. What they're proposing to give away is way more valuable than what we're getting. And anybody that comes and looks at this on the ground would, would recognize that. And so we just want to try to be out there telling you the truth. I mean, we're literally out there on the ground showing you what's in play. And it was a vacuum that was being kind of left wide open in this previous debate about the public land sale amendment, is no one was actually talking about the actual parcels and the policy implications of it if those parcels went through. And so then the public was making a public opinion on missing information. It doesn't mean that the public was right or wrong there. We think it was a mixed bag. It's probably better that that amendment was stripped out, because I think we all need more time to understand what, especially the Nevada side of that, was doing. And so we just thought, well, we'll go fill the vacuum where we can on these land exchanges and then use it as an example to educate people about how this works. And so this one is 1,800 acres of land owned by the BLM up in the mountains of western Wyoming. And the parcel is basically like a whole mountain ridge line with a meandering river running along the base of it. And it's a spectacular river. I mean, we found, so that I'll talk about the property valuations in a minute, but it's a very valuable piece of property, and they're wanting to, but the problem is it is landlocked. We couldn't actually get on the property itself. There were gates there. You couldn't get to it. There was another approach we could have taken, but it would have taken a whole half of the day to go the other way around, because that's something else people often don't fully understand in the West, is just to get from point A to point B. There's never like an easy path.
Sure.
And
especially
even then,
in Wyoming.
Yeah. And the private landowners in Wyoming are serious. They mean business when it comes to their gates, and their trespass laws are, I mean, they're strong, and you don't want to, and so you want to do this responsibly. We didn't get a chance to go look at, there's this other approach where you come across some state of Wyoming trust land, and then you can get to a corner crossing onto this parcel. And so this land exchange was really conjured up in 2015. So during the final year of the Obama administration is when they were proposing to do this. And you probably, if you haven't talked about the corner crossing precedent that was set in the 10th Circuit just a couple months ago, then you have somebody you need to interview on this podcast, because that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And so with that precedent now in effect for the state of Wyoming, where the BLM's claiming this parcel has no access, that isn't quite true anymore. New legal precedents do create access to this parcel that otherwise didn't exist. And if that access didn't exist, the BLM does have a strong case that even though it's really valuable, pristine, amazing land, they can't get to it to manage it without a helicopter. And but I don't think that's true anymore. So we think they need to do another alternative under NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, or Policy Act, whatever it's called. I always get it mixed up. But to analyze whether it is possible to create access to this land. And I think if the public were to rally around that request, the BLM and the state of Wyoming would be pressured to at least analyze and evaluate whether that's worth it or not. And I think the public interest should demand that. I think the public interest is strong that they do that.
So you brought up the corner crossing thing. And so if you've been listening to me for a while, you should probably know that is something that I'm very interested in. But I actually bumped into Ryan Callahan the other day at Lowe's, and he and I were talking about all kinds of different things. And one of the things that we talked about was the corner crossing. And he had brought up to me that it looks like they are going to bring it to the Supreme Court. Whether the Supreme Court accepts it or not and wants to hear it is another story, right? Yeah. It sounds like they would want to, because it would have to do with property rights, and that would be a landmark thing, for property rights.
Yeah. And I mean, there's other things to look at there. What I don't know is, maybe you'll know, is, are there other cases where this has been decided, like in the Ninth Circuit, in a different way, and so you have like two circuit courts that are interpreting this differently. Like if that was in effect, then the likelihood of this getting to the Supreme Court would be really high. If that isn't the case yet, then somebody still has some legal work to go do to try to create that circuit split and really get this on the radar of the justices there in the Supreme Court. And that might exist. I haven't done that deep of a dive into this, other than I have read the 10th Circuit ruling pretty thoroughly, and to be clear, I mean, we at Blue Ribbon Coalition, I'm a private property right guy, but I support the corner crossing ruling. Like, I think that public land should be accessible. This is when I talk about that we need rights of access, even landlocked rights of access. You can't landlock private property. That's a regulatory taking. And so because I don't have a private right of access to that landlocked parcel, no one's taken anything from me. But if the government were to create a right for me to be there that has some sort of financial value affixed to it, or some sort of and we could do this. Like Canada has already created outdoor recreation. They've designated it a health benefit that can be prescribed by a doctor. Other states are doing this now. There are movements to recognize public health benefits of outdoor recreation. Like, I don't know the exact path we follow to get there, but as soon as we have a codified right to be there, then it becomes a different story for the private property owners and what can be done to guarantee right of access to even orphaned public land parcels. Because right now, what's happening is an injustice. Like, a small group of private landowners or an individual private landowner shouldn't be able to exclusively enjoy public land just because they've managed to encircle that public land.
Sure.
So I do believe that this is an area of deficiency in the law, that there are public land parcels that are inaccessible, and that I very much support private property rights. And I've fought for private property right owners to have their access to their land guaranteed across public land in numerous instances. But that has to kind of go both ways. And so there has to be, when you have a public and private land system kind of intermesh like we do in the West, those are the sticky policy problems we have to work on. So corner crossing case, generally good. I think we need to build on that, and it's definitely a significant factor in this land exchange.
Yeah. So what are they saying the justification is for the exchange for Miller Mountain?
Well, that it is inaccessible. And so because it's inaccessible, it really doesn't have a lot of value to the public.
Okay.
And so then they've gone and identified several other parcels. There's another big parcel down along what's called the Big Sandy River in Wyoming. And there's some scattered little 40-acre pieces of land to the south of this that the BLM kind of wants, because it'll consolidate ownership in an area where they don't have these little island private inholdings. I'm 50-50 on that. I don't know that the private inholdings are creating that many very significant big public problems. I feel like for example, there some of these private little 40-acre pieces do have roads going through them, because they have the roads going to them. That's why the roads are there, is people to access their property. But then they go through the property. If they gate that off, that's something that BRC members don't like. We want to be able to travel unimpaired across public land on existing roads where we can. And the private gates are a problem that we run into all the time. I imagine hunters feel the same way. The agency can authorize a creation of a bypass route around that private property. And in some of this terrain I was in Wyoming, that's eminently feasible if you'll just allow yourself to build those bypass routes. The problem is you have very coordinated and powerful political organizations and movements that don't want any new roads built anywhere on public land, and they fight that. They litigate it. We are often in litigation against these groups. A lot of the wilderness groups get very religious about this. And so what would otherwise be a very simple solution of, well, we'll just build an additional road around this property so that the public can still access their public land, they're now acting like, oh, our hands are tied. We can't do anything. We have to give away this gem of a parcel up in the mountain so that we can take over this little 40-acre piece of land just to have a road access perfected. It's a weird negotiating position to put yourself into, because you won't allow yourself to use a categorical exclusion to build a quarter mile of new road. And so we want them to analyze that. Like, is this really the only option? Because I don't know that those parcels are more valuable. The parcel down along the Big Sandy River, that river is also privately mostly landlocked, because when you were homesteading Wyoming, if you weren't homesteading next to a river, you were homesteading to
Yeah.
a short death. You had to be by water. And so it would be nice to get access to the Big Sandy River, but acre for acre, if you look at what those two parcels include, everyone would look at the parcel up in the mountains and say that is like a crown jewel piece of public land down by the Big Sandy River. Awesome in its own. Like, I actually really love desert rivers. I think they have their own unique charm. It's cool. I would love to go camp down by that river. I get it, but it's just not the same.
Right.
And so then I'm like, well, and so the agency has to do valuations on this, right? Like, they can't just say, oh, let's just like cut a deal. You show me some land, I show you some land, we're going to do this. They actually are required to make sure that there's a value for value equalization that's being done. And they've done that. And they've said, not only is the land up on the mountain so unvaluable, they're actually going to pay the landowner who's taking it over $160,000 of money from our taxes to pay them to take this public land. This isn't just like selling it to the highest bidder. This is like, we think this land is so invaluable, we're going to pay you to take it off our hands.
Is that landowner like locked in with one of the politicians or something?
We have, it's called Fort Hill LLC. We don't know who they are. I don't know. The BLM's not very, like, there's not a lot of publicly available information at this stage in the process on that. I'm sure it would all come out in some kind of litigation where the full administrative record is made public. But that's what kind of started raising alarm bells with me on this one is, so then I went to Zillow. Okay. I'm not full disclosure, I recognize that valuing real estate in rural property is complicated. There are a lot of factors that go into it. But just broad brushes again here, there is a parcel of private land for sale along the same river that goes through the BLM land that we're trading away. This parcel is a little over 500 acres. It's downstream. It's out of the mountains, so you're down into more of the valley where it spreads out, and it's more of like a cottonwood. They're putting pivots in. They're doing irrigation. They're running cows down there. It's down into, like, it was a homesteaded parcel, right? Back in 1904, they say in the real estate listing. But they do say in the listing that this parcel of private land that is currently, you could go buy it today if you showed up with $5 million. You could own this 500-acre parcel in west of Big Piney in Wyoming. And they say that the fishery there, that the river has anywhere from 50 to 300 pounds of fish per mile in it, according to Wyoming Fish and Game. So it's like a decent river. Like, this is what we're not, like, there's documentation of this. Then they say there's a lot of big game that comes on the property, which means everything that's happening down here in the valley is just going to be even better up in the mountain.
Sure.
And so at 5.5 million for the 500, like, we did the math, it's about $11,000 an acre to buy comparable land. And that's how you do real estate valuation, is you look at comparable properties that have sold in a nearby area. There's an obvious comp right there on Zillow right now today. You can go look it up. $11,000 an acre. You can go down south where they're doing those 40-acre parcels. There's another parcel down there that they have out for sale, comparable, $5,000 an acre. So let half the value of what we're giving away. And then if you go out to the Big Sandy River, there's a ranch out there for sale. And we did the math on that one. And that one's a little harder because there's like water rights and structures and things. So it's not like quite sure like what's the actual value of the land versus all the improvements. But out there, we're getting land valued at more like $2,000 an acre. So we're giving up land that's at minimum $11,000 an acre.
Well, yeah, I mean, even if you said between the 5,000 and the 11,000, you're still at seven for two.
Yeah, 7 for 2. But then you add into this that the Grand Teton National Park, there was an inholding there that was just a one square mile section with 640 acres, right? And they sold that last year for $100 million, $150,000 an acre.
Wow.
And so that's what prime mountain riverfront real estate can go for in the state of Wyoming. So I think the property up in the mountains valued somewhere between $11,000 and $150,000 an acre.
Yeah.
And we're getting land that's valued at $2,000 an acre, almost in an acre for acre exchange. We're getting a little bit more acreage out of this. And that's where I think that they started this in 2015. We don't know that new valuations have been done. That was 10 years ago. A lot changes in a real estate market in 10 years.
Sure.
And so I suspect, I mean, I could be wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if the agencies are just sort of been given a mandate of let's get all of the old NEPA analysis projects that you have sitting on yourself signed and done and get them out the door. And so there's agency pressure to show, hey, we're being prolific, we're getting stuff done. And that could be the case, you know, and this one's been sitting there. Well, let's just finish this one up. You have all these agency personnel right now are kind of in shock from the higher, like the firings and Doge and all of that. And it's a sympathetic to that, right? I mean, they're in a tough spot. I don't necessarily think anybody's being a bad guy here, but the deal just doesn't add up to any rational person looking at it. And that's why we have a public comment process. So we can go and say, hey, and that's what we're asking. We just like, we want to see the valuations. How are we getting this $11,000 per acre piece? Is it really so? If we don't have access, that now lowers the value of land that was otherwise $11,000 an acre down to $2,000 an acre, then we now have a monetary value of what access is worth.
Yeah.
That means something. I don't know quite what to do with that, but we ran into problems. The reason we care about this too is because you get land exchanges like in Bears Ears National Monument. They wanted to exchange out all the state trust lands. And the state thought they were getting this really great deal because they were getting a couple $100 million worth of other BLM land elsewhere. And I'm like, if this is Bears Ears, we've been told for years that this is like national park level quality land. It should be valued somewhere closer to what the value of the property in the Tetons was, 100 million an acre, or 100 million for a 640 acre section, which is what a sitless section is. But we're giving it away, but they believe it's worthless. And they say, well, you can't do anything with it because it's in the monument. And I'm like, well, then the monument impaired the value of this asset. And so these land exchanges really operate in this world where normal real estate laws don't apply, but they try to make them operate by real estate law or just sort of norms that we're all used to. And I care deeply that public lands are valued at their true value, and that we don't use exchanges to undervalue them because they are valuable to the public. And if we don't start figuring out better methodologies for how we value these things, we're going to lose a lot of valuable land through these exchanges. And this one's a case in point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, man, there's so much to unpack with that because I'm glad that you broke down what the valuation side of it was, because what I was afraid you were going to do in the beginning was say, when you were saying, oh, this piece of property is so much more valuable. Well, recreationally valuable or like intrinsically valuable. And so recreationally and intrinsically, it just seems like it's more valuable. And
yeah, but I mean, recreationally, what the BLM would say is, well, yeah, it would be recreational valuable if you could access it, but you can't. And so, and that's my response to that is I'm not confident of your position on that. I want you to analyze a NEPA alternative that analyzes what it would take to coordinate with the state of Wyoming, your coordinating agency, and build us an access route that gets us to that corner crossing. And then tell me if it's really that unvaluable, because we know the private property owners who have landlocked this property do charge for access to come and hunt and fish on these properties. And so there's value there recreationally. You know, there's a reason somebody wants this.
Absolutely.
And so that's
so real quick, what would be the flaws then in the NEPA process? Because you're like the third guest that I've had on that has talked about NEPA one way or the other. And that whole process seems to be swayed depending on whoever is implementing the NEPA process.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I have my own opinions about NEPA because we do it every day. And so but it is sort of like, this is the water we're swimming in today. Someday it's a polluted garbage filled stream of garbage. Sometimes it's a river I can actually navigate. And right now it's a polluted garbage stream filled of garbage because it's just gone through it. The problem with NEPA is the way it gets implemented is through regulatory implementations. And even before the Trump administration came in and started doing a lot of regulatory rescissions and revisions, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals had basically invalidated the Center for Environmental Quality implementing guidelines for NEPA. And so these were already going out the door via the judicial system. And then you had the Trump administration come in and basically remove out the Biden era NEPA implementing regulations. They're now working on new versions of this. And then you had the Supreme Court decision came out just a week or two ago about the railroad in the Uinta Basin in Utah, where the justices came down hard on the side of agencies have a lot of discretion in how they implement NEPA. And so to the extent that there are deficiencies in the process at this point, the agencies would have to be pretty negligent because they have a lot of discretion on how they implement it. With this particular land exchange, and so let me just summarize though, because of that recent Supreme Court hearing, I think you're going to see a tidal shift in how NEPA gets implemented and used, especially during this current administration and also how it gets litigated in the court. I think the litigation paths for NEPA are going to be where they've been a pretty reliable way to litigate federal land policy. I think that the Supreme Court kind of signaled they've had enough of this through that decision. And so what that means, will all of us who do this litigation, we're going to have to find out. I still have that decision left still some opportunities open for NEPA. We have cases we're looking at actively right now that still kind of slip through the cracks of what some of the things left open by that decision that were left open. This is one of those because they are supposed to make their decisions based on good data. If they haven't done a real estate valuation since 2015, no reasonable judge is going to look at this and say, yeah, in 2025, that data is still valid. No real estate in the market has static underlying economics for 10 years straight that nothing changes. That is not reasonable. And they have to at least hit the standard of being reasonable. And so if all we do as the public is raise that concern about the valuations on this, then if I was the agency decision maker there, I would probably go back and say, we should redo those valuations. We should go through another round of NEPA and disclose those to the public and make sure we're getting all the public feedback we can and make sure we're doing the right thing. That would probably be the best outcome for the public here and sort of the most publicly responsible position for the BLM to take. Their position is also going to say, hey, look, we're 10 years into this. We just want to get it done. And that's also an indictment of the process. It shouldn't take 10 years to do this. They should have finished this up in 2015 when they had actionable, relevant, current data, and they didn't. I don't know why. But to dust this off the shelf and bring it up now means there's a whole lot of new problems they have to deal with. But it's possible they thought they would just slide this under the radar and didn't think any of the groups would catch on to this. But we did. And there's other ones. Just today, we found a new land exchange being proposed in Wyoming, and there's going to be more of these. And the public's very much engaged on these topics right now. So they need to take a breath and step back and make sure they're doing these the right way so that, because to your point, not all land exchanges are bad. I really went into this one thinking I could come out supporting it or I could come out opposing it. I don't know until I go look on the ground and see what's really happening. Right. And that's why we're a little late. I mean, we have till tomorrow to do public comment. I wish we had weeks, but it takes time to go out and do the field ground truthing on this stuff to where you can really have a fully informed position on these things. I think we have the best informed position on this exchange right now of anybody out there. And I still think we're missing things, but I think we have enough of a position that the public can act on. And that's what we hope they do.
So why is it well, how long has this been going on where they decided, okay, we're going to kick this thing into gear and we're going to do the exchange? And then are they normally this non-transparent? Because it seems like this whole thing is not very transparent.
I would say it's standard transparency level, and so this started in 2015. They had a public process, and various groups engaged. State of Wyoming was involved, and they kind of laid the groundwork for this as this is a good exchange back in 2015. And that was the scoping period, which is just really like the very first step in this. You usually have 2 or 3 more procedural steps after that all kind of invite some form of public engagement or comment. And then they did nothing on it for years. So that started in Obama. Trump administration term 1 does nothing on this. Biden administration does nothing on this. And now Trump administration term 2. And I bring that up because the politics, like the priorities of an administration will affect these things. But nobody took this up as a priority. And then now all of a sudden it is. They claim that there was some sort of a public release on this back in March of this year. We didn't see it back then. And that's odd because we do track the NEPA register for the BLM on a very rigorous basis. And we do look for land exchanges on a regular basis. And so they usually don't fly under the radar. But again, it's a big system. There's a lot going on. It is possible we missed it. But so there was one step of public comment that really, I think nobody engaged on. And it's not like they're going out there broadcasting this. They're not putting this on their social media channels all the time. They're not, if you're not watching these things through their feeds, a lot gets flown under the radar that nobody catches on to. That's our group. We try to track these. And if it affects outdoor recreation, we try to engage on them. What we're doing now, where we do like a public campaign around an issue, for every one of those we do in a given year, there's 6 that we are just commenting on behind the scenes that we don't really make a big public campaign around. And so we're commenting on hundreds of NEPA actions a year that affect outdoor recreation. And this one, then they did open it up for this final round of public comment on the current proposal. And that, since this ends tomorrow, that it really started almost 30 days ago. So we've had a 30-day window to comment, and that is pretty standard. And so I wouldn't say that they've been abusive of the Administrative Procedure Act required timelines of allowing for public engagement, but the public often just ignores these things. They just don't know what to look for and how to engage with them. But at the same time, huge mistake to start a thing in 2015, park it for 10 years and then start it up again, because a lot changes in 10 years. And that's what our beef is. Even though they followed the standard timeline, it's not standard to put a 10-year gap in the middle of all of that. They should have started new in 2025 with new valuations and a new proposal and make sure that this all still makes sense. And then presenting that to the public to kind of show their homework on how they got there. And then maybe this does make sense. They haven't made that all available to us at this point. And so we know just from the videos we're released on this now, they are getting public resistance, and but I think having more information disclosed around this would be a net benefit for those who want the project to be completed, because you want it to be completed with public consent as much as possible. And they haven't really done their outward sort of public relations work to make that a reality for this one. If a group like ours and others sort of catch wind of this and find problems, then they have to deal with those. So
so you had mentioned that it's an LLC that they're looking at swapping the land with. Mm-hmm. Do you know what type of company that is? Is it just a standard LLC for land holdings, or is this a mineral mining type company? Do we know anything about it, or who really benefits from this land exchange?
My guess is it's a connected business to one of the other private property owners in the area, and they're just trying to consolidate their land holdings. What we saw when we were there was kind of the infrastructure for a ranching operation. So my guess is it's kind of like a homesteaded ranch that also does some sort of paid access for sportsman activities, like hunting and fishing. And they're just trying to consolidate their land holding. That could be one version of this. The BLM is retaining the subsurface mineral rights to this land, and so they're just giving the surface to the new landowner. So that means that if the new landowner does decide to do any sort of mineral extraction on the private land they acquire, they would have to lease that from the BLM and go through the BLM's process on this. But that's not out of the question that they could. I mean, that is carved out in the deal. Where right now to get in there with a mineral extraction lease would be really, my guess, is difficult because of the private landlocked situation. Because getting in for recreation is a lot less of an impact than getting in for industrialization. And I don't know if there's any resources there. There might or might not be. It is possible that there's a conservation interest connected to this. I mean, the Western Watersheds Project actually is on record supporting this project as it was originally introduced in 2015. And they're one of the groups kind of yelling the loudest right now is being opposed to any form of transfer of public lands into private hands, but they supported this. And they would probably say, well, this is a net benefit for conservation because we're getting other riparian areas that are now in federal control. And that's up for them to explain. I don't speak for that organization, but they're not normally the organization I would see supporting something like this, which makes me wonder if there isn't some sort of backdoor conservation easement waiting in the wings to lock up this river and have it be connected in some way to that. We don't know. It's a kind of, we don't know a whole lot about the company that is behind it.
Yeah, and company wise, from a real estate standpoint, Wyoming is one of the best states to have a company in because of the transparency or lack thereof.
Yeah, they have
when
pretty
it comes
good
to-
corporate privacy shields. And so,
yeah, so that makes it really difficult. So maybe you already said this, but how did BRC become engulfed in this specific?
Miller Mountain Land Exchange.
Yeah.
I mean, my policy director, we really go and check what's going through the BLM register, the federal register. We're on all the Forest Service lists. And so we just track anything that affects recreation. And
you just happen to come across it.
Land exchanges do. And this one came across the feed. And so we started looking into it. And my initial take was, if you read the BLM's sort of initial report on it, it's like, this is going to be good for recreation. And so we were like, oh, this is probably going to be an easy one. We'll go support it. And then I started looking more and more into it. And I'm like, hold on, there is more going on to this one. And it will benefit recreation to kind of perfect access to some of these other parcels. But it's just not even remotely an apples to apples trade of what we're losing. And so I don't know if this small benefit to recreation is enough not to really scrutinize this one a lot harder. And our other concern is they are saying a lot of big things about how this will improve recreation access to the new parcels that we're getting that were formerly private land. But they're not giving us any codified guarantees of that. And that's actually another big NEPA problem for me, because NEPA has to, like, the point of NEPA is to say, we are doing this project for this purpose, this need. And they're saying the purpose is to expand recreation access to these newly acquired parcels. But then they're saying we can't analyze in this process what that would look like. We're going to do that through a future travel management planning process, is when we'll guarantee the access to those parcels. And that could be 5-10 years down the road. We don't know. There's no guarantee when that will happen. And so it's sort of this empty promise of we'll get some public land access down the road. None of that's been codified strictly in writing into the deal with some sort of a legal instrument like a right-of-way or an easement or something on those privately acquired, or the acquired private properties. And so that's another concern we have, is that needs to be guaranteed now. It's within the scope of what they're analyzing. So for them to offload that to some future process that we have no guarantee when that'll happen, they should analyze that now. They should create the right-of-ways now, where they can still get the current private landowner to do that. If I was that landowner, I could go create a public right-of-way across my property, go through the legal process to do that, and then transfer it, convey it to the BLM with those right-of-ways already intact. Then we know there's this legal foundation underneath this, that to remove that means we have to undo a thing that got done legally, kind of like a conservation easement. It's hard to undo. We want something like that that's hard to undo before that comes into the federal ownership, because trying to work through the federal administrative process to guarantee a motorized recreation route access can quickly devolve into decades of lawsuits. I know that from experience.
Yeah. So, do you think that this whole situation could be a blueprint case for other controversial land swaps?
I wish I could say yes, but my advice to anybody that chooses to like take public positions on these things is every single one of them is different. And if you're not willing to like look into the specific policy, I mean, we really do read 350 NEPA actions a year. Yeah, that's in the last 2 or 3 years, I think. I mean, it's like that's a lot of paperwork.
Heck
And if
yeah.
you're not going to do that much work, then just know whatever your position is going to be really misinformed. Not because you're dumb, not because you got brainwashed by some social media channels, just as this is land policy. If you've ever signed a real estate contract, it's this thick. Even just like buy your house, these are complicated transactions. They have a lot of nuance and detail to them. We tried to understand these. We went on the ground and looked at them. That's not always possible, but everyone's different. But so that to me is the blueprint. Like, you'll have a better informed position if you read the documentation. If you have the chance to get on the ground and look at it, then you know more than 99% of anybody else that's going to have anything to say about this. And then you have to decide what are your interests. If you're a hunting advocacy group and you care about hunting, look at it through that lens and just say, how is this going to affect hunting? And then tell us the truth. That's what didn't happen in Utah. We had like backcountry hunters for anglers coming out and saying that this public land sell-off is going to reduce hunting access. I'm like, you don't live here. You don't know what these parcels actually are. Nobody's hunting these parcels. Like, they're in the city. They're next to critical water infrastructure, and it's just not where you hunt. There's not wildlife there. Anyone local to the area would be like, you're just not right about this. I get that you care about scrutiny and transparency around public land sell-offs in general, but to say this is about hunting, you're misinforming people. But in this case, it is. This parcel in Wyoming is about hunting. And so if you're someone who cares about it, you should take a position on it. You should go research it and understand it, and then fight for your interest. And our interest is a little broader. We care about hunting access, but we care about the broader recreation access too. I think this area, the ridge line, if you could get a perfected road access through onto this property, that ridge line up above the top of it looking down on the river would be an awesome place to just go like overland camping and have a fire ring and go get. It'd be really hard to get to. There'd be nobody there most times of the year, because just to get there is going to take you. It's not close to any big population centers in Wyoming. It's an excursion just to get there. It'd be an awesome place to just go get away from things. And so I look at what are all the recreation opportunities. It's a little broader, but we do care. We have a lot of members who are hunters and sportsmen and all of that. And so we do want their access managed and kept as open as possible too. And it's possible that it makes the most sense to make anyone wanting to go fish have to hike up and down the mountain, which would turn it into a pretty exclusive little fishery. But some fishermen would appreciate that. I'm not, how that parcel gets managed once access is perfected is up, I think should be a separate discussion, but so I don't know if that's a blueprint or not, but every one of these we look at differently. Every legislative proposal we look at differently. It's like interesting because Representative Zinke had his Keep Public Lands and Public Hands Act, and it sounds good, and it kind of has some statutory prescriptions, but then he has 12 exceptions to when it's okay to sell public lands out of public hands. And these are long-standing exceptions. These aren't like this exchange we're talking about today is one of those exceptions. This wouldn't have been prevented by his legislation because it's a FLPMA authorized exchange. And that is something he carves out as those are still okay. So he hasn't really, like, his act is interesting. I think it's almost a messaging bill more than a substantive one because they left so many of the exceptions in place. And if those exceptions are viable, then what makes them more valuable than any new ideas? Right. And so I think to say there's a blueprint or that there's always a right way or wrong way, like the way these groups talked about the public sale amendment, that we will never let an inch of public land leave public hands. It's like, that's not realistic. Like, that's not how this ever has worked. But to their point, there has always been a process, like what we're talking about now with Miller Mountain Land Exchange. You've had an administrative and legal process to follow. And so we'll see. I mean, I think we have to be open-minded about it. There are some exchanges, and you've probably seen some because you seem to be knowledgeable about the topic, where there was a net benefit to the public.
Sure.
There are some public lands out there that the BLM owns that it doesn't want to own. It's like a pain in the butt to manage them. The value for the public use is really low, and they'd rather not have a whole bunch of orphan parcels. They like big contiguous landscapes that their laws empower them to manage bigger landscapes better than a whole bunch of scattered parcels.
Well, and if the corner crossing thing ended up going broad spectrum and it was legal all across the country, then it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal in Montana, right? Like where I'm from. But here, the big issue is, just like you said, there's checkerboard everywhere and you can't get to it. In Montana, it's still really looked down upon, and not by the people here, but by government entities and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where land swaps can be a good thing. Now, are you getting dollar for dollar, either recreationally and intrinsically? That's another question that you have to ask, because traditionally, from what I've seen, most of the BLM land I see is very deserty, doesn't have a whole lot of land that I want to go to unless I'm like looking for antelope, or maybe mule deer, every once in a while mule deer. It just depends where you're at. But I tend to gravitate more towards mountainous terrain, so like you said, with the Miller Mountain thing, I would never give I don't want to say never, but I wouldn't give an inch of my mountain land for 40 acres of desert. It's just
that's what they're proposing. Thing. Like, we should be trading desert for desert and mountain for mountain. There might be some mountain parcel somewhere that would be a benefit to get, but that's not what's on the table, because a private landowner that owns that mountain property knows what it's worth. They're never going to, like,
100%.
There's a reason that's not happening.
Yeah.
And so that's why we thought this one was worth pointing out. And to be fair, back to your blueprint, I mean, the BLM, we don't have to create the blueprint. The BLM already did. They say they have to create, like, it has to be an exchange in kind for certain. I mean, I could pull up the NEPA document and read it to you. It's like, if we're trading riparian wetland, we have to also get riparian wetland. And they did do that with this exchange. But the value of the wetland up here in the mountains, where there was all these beaver ponds and everything, like, this was like what the environmentalists dream of what a riparian wetland looks like. And then you have this desert, which is an active cattle ranch. That's been an active cattle ranch for 100 years. That's just a different riparian wetland. And I think they have their own unique charm and value, but they're not the same, and they're not valued the same. But the BLM's acting like they are. And so,
yeah.
And I think most of your listeners would agree with me on that. And we have pictures on our website of the two parcels, and you can kind of compare them side by side. You can go look at them on the maps on Onyx or whatever apps you use and look at these. And I mean, I knew looking from the map, I'm like, there's no way that once you zoom in and see this river going through the property, like, I can't believe they're giving this away for that. But
yeah, no kidding.
And then I went and sat on the ground, and it confirmed everything the map was telling me.
So I just got a couple more questions, because we are running a little bit long, but so do we need legislative reform around some of this stuff, or better watchdog groups, or more watchdog groups, or all of the above?
That's a good question. I mean, legislative reform around this, I think, is necessary. How I would legislatively address this, like orphan parcel and scattered parcel problem, um, I'd have to think about that, because once the corner crossing thing becomes passed, it's like, I want roads that go across the corner, but they're going to say a road's too big of a disturbance. You're somehow going to affect that private property. And it's like, well, where does that corner actually start? I mean, do you have to like go down to like the molecular quantum physics level of a point of where that corner actually is? Or like, to finding that corner is interesting. And so I think if there was some sort of a implied easement that could get created through statute, where when you have public land parcels, that there is like almost like an
A
implied easement
10-foot
across.
section or something.
Yeah, that is just like, and a private property owner has to respect that, and the public landowners need to respect the private property and create a rule that everybody can live with, and at least is enforceable and can follow. I think that would be like, if we got all the emotion out of it, that would be reasonable, because it wasn't rational to create the corner system to begin with. Like, that was just an accident of history that made sense at the time. Nowadays there's just a different use pattern on the lands, and we should accommodate it. And then add to that some sort of a guaranteed access right, so that if you have an orphan parcel that has recreation value and you trade that away, how are the recreation users going to be made whole? And it has to be that we're getting something of equal or comparable value somewhere else. I think still we have that's almost still the system we have. We just need to actually apply it. And I do think like what Nevada's doing with SNPLMA, where they're allowing for some like disposal of public land, we shouldn't lose our mind over that. Like, there is some parcels where it would make sense for, like, if you look at some of the parcels in Nevada now, I mean, they are literally in the middle of subdivisions in Las Vegas. Why on earth are we having the BLM manage that? I don't want them spending a dime of taxpayer money managing a gravel vacant lot in the middle of Vegas. They should dispose of it and focus on managing the stuff we like that has recreation value, and and so we as a public need to do a better job of at least meeting that problem where it is, and allowing for an actual rational discussion around that. And people are going to freak out that I said that, but it's like, there are some parcels of public land that probably shouldn't be. And we should find ways to make sure that our public land managers are managing the highest value, best public lands that really create that broad public good for us, and so that they aren't diverted from. That's a lot of work to manage what they've got. It is a lot of work, and to cloud their mandate with all of these little scattered parcel thing, like, it just is a problem we need to help them fix, so they can focus on the bigger things. And it's weird that that's so controversial, but it's because that line of don't sell, keep public lands in public hands, that line just sounds so good. And we generally agree with it, because we've all been out on areas of public land that we've fallen in love with and feel really deeply emotionally connected to. And we definitely want to keep those in public hands. But nobody's done that in the orphan parcel in the middle of Las Vegas. I promise you. It's maybe a homeless camp or something. I don't know. But and so there's, I think, some rational move where like cleaning up the estate wouldn't be a terrible prospect. I think there's some places where that actually is reasonable. And that's why we've tried to ground these in. Like this other one that came out in Wyoming, it's kind of out more by Gillette. We'll do another one. I mean, when these come up, we'll do more, and we'll put them out there in the public. We haven't always made these ones public because it hasn't always been a super, like, a lot of them are pretty routine and non-controversial or net benefit to the public. But we'll start broadcasting more of these because we do track them. And so the public can kind of see that there's a whole variety of these. Like, this one's controversial. It's going to be like they're giving away something really good. As far as like you asked about the watchdog groups, I think it's good to have a variety out there. I do notice that in this land use space that there starts to become very dogmatic positions where everybody kind of locks in step around a certain position. And that becomes the position. And if you're not somehow like in alignment with the orthodoxy of all the other advocacy and watchdog groups, that you somehow don't love public land. And this happens to us a lot because we are often in an unorthodox position on these things because we're advocating for a very specific group of users. But we have to navigate the complexities of this like anybody. I am sensitive to what the hunters and the fishers want. I am sensitive to what the wilderness advocates want. And I'm sensitive to what we want. And we're all trying to navigate that. And I think having more voices in that arena is better than one sort of monopolized movement. I like a lot of different perspectives. And when you get into these issues like this Miller Mountain Land Exchange, I mean, you can try to politicize it, and everybody's been coming into our comments being, oh, this is Trump selling this off. And I'm like, yeah, it started with Obama, and Biden could have done it and fixed it. Like, this one isn't really partisan, I don't think. I think it's just a normal run-of-the-mill land exchange where somebody concocted up an idea to get a really nice piece of land, and they're gonna try.
Yeah.
I wouldn't blame them. It's an awesome piece of land, but I think we, the public, should have a say in it, and I think we're getting a short end of the stick on this one.
Yeah. I hate the partisanship, and I hate getting those comments where it's clearly one side and there's no talking any sense into some of those people, and you can't get them to almost take an objective look and say, hey, okay, take politics out of it and just focus on the actual issue at hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they want to have so much tribalism, and they want to take that side of tribalism rather than,
Well,
look at the
it
issue.
simplifies a really complex thing. Like, if you can't go get on the ground and look at this, but you want to have an opinion about it, filtering it through your sort of political persuasion or identity is an easy way to get to the answer of where your position should be. And it's normal. We all do that. With not all of us are going to be experts on every policy issue, so we're all going to do that on a variety of things. So it's part of being citizens, but that's why on things like this, we really value getting into the weeds on the issue, getting onto the ground on the issue. And that's why we feel pretty confident we can just go out and advocate our principles, which is we want improved and expanded recreation access. We want to keep high value recreation public lands public, and we're going to fight for that. And that, it was pretty clear cut on this one. I don't know what the political persuasion on that opinion is, but that's what we want, and that's what we're fighting for.
Yep.
And it means that they should slow this one down, and they should relook at it. They should give us good valuations, like markets, like having it work, like having it be a deal that makes sense within a real estate market. I mean, that's kind of a libertarian-y, maybe right-leaning position, but wanting to protect the environmental conditions up there is left-leaning, and we want that too. It's like, I mean, I kind of can make the case that we're being all of the above on this land exchange, but what we really care about is we want the public to go enjoy that place because it was awesome.
So what's the clearest and most effective way that people can make their voice heard with this situation, or any other future situations? Because we're running really short, right? It's tomorrow.
Yeah. This one has a clock that's ticking. That's why we got on this. You invited me on the show. I'm like, hey, can you turn around the show quick because we're running out of time. So at Blue Ribbon Coalition, we do the usual action alerts that a lot of groups do, where we make it super easy for you to go make a comment. You basically put in your name in a form, go share it, and it sends it to the agency, sends it to your members of Congress. I'll chat this over to you in a text message, and you can put it in the show notes or whatever makes the most sense for you. And they can do that there, but we always link to the BLM page itself. So if you don't want to use our form, you want to go do your own thing, go to the BLM page. They have a participate now button. You can add your voice your own way. We don't really care. I mean, if you come into our form, we usually then enroll you in our action alert, like our newsletter. We send at least one action alert out a week of somewhere in this country, something's going on, and we're educating you about new things every week. And so if you want to just be more engaged in general, we do it. You don't have to agree with us. We get it, but you can use our tool to go make a comment that's something we don't agree with. We don't care. We just want more public voices involved at all is better than silence.
Absolutely.
And so we've done it on this one. I don't know anyone else is going to have the time to get anything out on this like we have. And so for this one, that's probably the quickest, most effective way to just get something in before the deadline. Once the deadline's over, then it becomes kind of more of a longer game of what are they doing. If they decide to go through with the exchange and they go through with it on terms we don't like, these are the kinds of cases that we sometimes will explore a litigation challenge on. I don't know if we'll do that on this one. If that's the case, then we would want what would help us decide that is if there was like a lot of public outcry for that. And we had a good case. I mean, I do think there's NEPA problems with where they are now with this. Um, so there would be things down the road that if we still don't like it, there's other recourses and remedies. But for now, I think what we're asking for is reasonable, and I think the agency will want to try to get this done in a way that doesn't create controversy. So they might try to meet our demands. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, not demands, but it's like requests that we're making through public comment.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I'm gonna try and turn this thing around, really quick, and yeah, I'll throw out a few clips and everything like that, and so it helps
Yeah,
generate.
no, I think that'd be great. We want
All
to
right.
see. I mean, and I wanted to be on your show. I think you reached out to me a while ago. We want to let your audience know what we're doing because we think it benefits the hunters.
Sure.
And if we got more feedback from that community, we could kind of gear our work in that direction too to make sure that everyone's understanding how what we're doing is benefiting the hunting community as well, and also understand your concerns because you look at land use a little differently than the average sort of recreational off-roader or dirt biker, and that's something we want to learn. We're always open to learning more about, especially once we get into really localized specific areas.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. All right.
Yeah.